When Alexander the Great died unexpectedly in Babylon in 323 BC, his sprawling empire, which stretched from Greece to the Indus, had no clear successor. At the partition of Babylon, his senior generals, known as the Diadochi, carved out satrapies for themselves. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted companions and his childhood friend. Recognizing Egypt's strategic wealth and defensibility, Ptolemy moved swiftly to secure power. In 322 BC, he smuggled Alexander's body into Memphis, thereby claiming both the divine mantle of the Arged line and the loyalty of Egyptian priests. Over the next decade, Ptolemy I Soter consolidated his rule through a blend of military strength, political savvy, and religious adaptation. He defeated rival Diadochi, most notably Perdiccas and later Antigonus, ensuring Egypt would remain an independent Hellenistic kingdom. By establishing Alexandria as his capital, Ptolemy anchored his dynasty in a city founded by Alexander himself. There, he commissioned the Museum and its famed library, attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean. The city became a beacon of learning and Hellenistic culture. Ptolemy also adopted Egyptian royal customs to legitimize his authority before the native population. He married into a Persian noble family and assumed the ancient pharaonic titles, presenting himself in temple reliefs as a successor to the pharaohs and receiving priestly coronation in Memphis. At the same time, he maintained Greek institutions for his Macedonian vanguard, garrisons, colonies of veteran soldiers, and Hellenic civic structures. This dual system allowed Greeks and Egyptians to coexist under a shared monarchy. Economically, Ptolemy inherited fertile Nile lands. He reorganized temple estates into effective revenue sources, monopolized the export of grain and papyrus, and fostered Red Sea trade with Arabia and India. His naval expansions protected shipping lanes and secured Egypt's maritime frontiers. By the time he assumed the royal title of pharaoh around 305 BC, Ptolemy I had laid the foundations of a dynasty that blended Macedonian military prowess with Egyptian religious tradition and cosmopolitan Hellenistic learning. When he abdicated in favor of his son Ptolemy II in 283 BC, Egypt stood as one of the wealthiest, most stable kingdoms in the Mediterranean, a flourishing cradle for a dynasty that would endure nearly 3 centuries. Upon accession in 283 BC, Ptolemy II Philadelphus inherited a realm that stretched beyond Egypt's borders into Cyrenaica, Cyprus, the Aegean Islands, parts of Anatolia, and even the Levant. He cemented this expansive satrapal system through diplomatic marriages, most famously marrying his full sister Arsinoe II, to evoke the Egyptian model of divine sibling marriage, and by installing loyal Macedonian and local elites as governors in key provinces. In Egypt, Ptolemy II reorganized the nomes into administrative districts overseen by a blend of Egyptian nomarchs and Greek managers. Temple estates, central to both religious life and economic production, were brought under closer royal supervision. Their surplus grain financed the royal household and Alexandria's subsidies to cities across the Mediterranean. The king standardized tax assessments, instituting the apomandrate levy on land based on surveyed measurements. Abroad, Ptolemy II maintained a strong navy to secure maritime provinces and protect grain convoys bound for Greece. His fleet defeated rival Diadochi in the Second Syrian War, retaining control of southern Anatolia and Phoenicia. He also sponsored garrisons at Pelusium and other frontier posts to check desert tribes and Nubian incursions. Culturally, the satrapal court in Alexandria patronized Egyptian cults, endowing the Temple of Serapis at Memphis, while maintaining Macedonian military colonies in Fayum and the Delta. This dual governance model balanced Hellenistic political structures with ancient Egyptian religion, ensuring local participation in government and stabilizing Ptolemaic rule. By 246 BC, as Ptolemy II prepared to name his son co-regent, the kingdom stood both economically robust and geopolitically secure. The mechanisms of satrapal governance he had perfected would endure through successive reigns, providing the backbone for centuries of Ptolemaic administration. Founded by Alexander and elevated by the Ptolemies, Alexandria, nestled on the Mediterranean shore, quickly became the jewel of the Hellenistic world. Under Ptolemy II and his successors, the city's urban grid expanded from the royal palace quarter through Doric, Ionic, and then grandiose pharaonic-style boulevards, lined with colonnaded porticos and monumental public buildings. Central to Alexandria's prestige was the Mausoleum and its library, established around 280 BC. Sponsored by Ptolemy II and Ptolemy III, the institution housed perhaps 500,000 papyrus scrolls, attracting scholars such as Euclid, Eratosthenes, and Callimachus. The royal library functioned as both a research center and diplomatic tool. Envoys exchanged texts for access, while rival cities sought to imitate its model. The city's cosmopolitan demography, Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Syrians, and others, fostered a dynamic cultural fusion. Public festivals blended Egyptian rites with Greek games and theatrical performances in the Great Theater District. Temples of Serapis, Isis, and traditional Egyptian deities stood alongside gymnasia and Serapeans, illustrating the seamless syncretism. Architecturally, Alexandria pioneered hydraulic engineering. Aqueducts channeled freshwater from the Nile to urban cisterns, while the Heptastadian Causeway linked Pharos Island, home of the lighthouse, to the mainland. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, completed under Ptolemy II, rose some 120 meters above sea level, guiding ships and symbolizing the city's maritime supremacy. By mid-Ptolemaic era, Alexandria's intellectual ferment and urban grandeur had made it the Mediterranean's cultural capital, a living laboratory of cross-cultural exchange whose urban model and scholarly achievements would influence the Roman world for centuries. The fertile Nile delta underpinned Ptolemaic Egypt's wealth. Ptolemy II and Ptolemy III expanded irrigation networks, dredging canals such as the Bar Yusuf and constructing new branch canals to increase arable land. The state instituted precise cadastral surveys to tax land by productive capacity, recorded on papyri now preserved in Oxyrhynchus and Elephantine. To secure grain supplies for export and domestic distribution, Ptolemaic authorities established centralized granaries at key ports, Alexandria, Canopus, and Pelusium. These storehouses guaranteed that surplus wheat could be loaded onto merchant vessels bound for Greece and Rome, while also serving as flood buffers during Nile inundations. The grain trade yielded massive revenues, financing royal building projects, maintaining military garrisons, and subsidizing the Alexandrian populace. Beyond grain, Egypt exported papyrus, linen, and luxurious glassware. Ptolemaic craft workshops in Memphis and Alexandria produced fine-painted tomb panels, coinage bearing Hellenistic portraits, and guild-regulated artifacts. Long-distance trade reached the Red Sea ports, Naucratis and Berenice Troglodytica, where Indian Ocean spices, frankincense from Arabia, and East African ivory arrived, funneled northward by state-chartered merchant ships. The crown's monopoly on key commodities, such as papyrus and mines in the eastern desert, ensured royal control over lucrative resources. Periodic price controls and grain dole policies mitigated famine risks, enhancing the monarchy's popularity. Tax farming, however, and heavy levies on tenant farmers sometimes provoked local unrest, forcing Ptolemaic rulers to balance revenue needs with peasant welfare. By combining advanced agrarian management, expansive trade networks, and state oversight of vital industries, the Ptolemies transformed Egypt into the granary and luxury goods emporium of the eastern Mediterranean, an economic engine that sustained their dynasty's power for centuries. Ptolemaic Egypt's security relied heavily on its navy. From the reign of Ptolemy II onward, Alexandria maintained a fleet of triremes and quadriremes housed in the royal harbors of the Great Harbor and Eunostos. These warships protected grain convoys, policed piracy in the Aegean, and projected power against rival Hellenistic kingdoms, most notably in the Syrian wars against the Seleucids. Unlike earlier pharaohs, the Ptolemies lacked a large native conscript army. Instead, they relied on professional mercenaries, Greeks from the Aegean, Thracians, and Galatians, supplemented by native Egyptian recruits in light infantry roles. Military settlements in Pelusium and eastern delta fortresses secured border regions and served as training grounds. Regular campaigns into the Levant under Ptolemy II Philadelphus and Ptolemy IV Philopator secured coastal cities, Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, though holding these required constant reinforcement against Seleucid counterattacks. The decisive battles at Raphia in 217 BC and later engagements at Panium illustrated both the strength and the limits of Ptolemaic arms. While winning territory, maintaining garrisons drained the treasury. Internal military revolts, such as the revolt of Theagenes at Memphis in 204 BC, and the increasing assertiveness of native Egyptian soldiers, forced successive kings to negotiate with urban elites and religious authorities. By the 1st century BC, reliance on Roman auxiliaries further underscored the Ptolemies' diminishing martial autonomy. Thus, while naval superiority allowed the Ptolemaic dynasty to safeguard maritime trade and project influence, the cost of prolonged land wars and dependence on foreign mercenaries gradually weakened Egypt's independent military capacity. Ptolemaic succession crises and palace intrigues plagued the dynasty from Ptolemy IV onward. The king's widow, Arsinoe III, was assassinated by minister Sosibius in 204 BC, who then manipulated her young son, Ptolemy V's reign. Widespread revolts, such as the native Egyptian uprising led by Horwenifer and later Anquenifer in Upper Egypt, exploited peasant grievances over heavy taxation and displacement. Intermarriage within the royal family, intended to reinforce divine sibling rulership, sometimes led to lethal power struggles. Ptolemy V's own reign was characterized by court factions and the failed coup of his stepmother, Berenice II. Similarly, the boy king, Ptolemy VII Neos Philopaters' disputed claim triggered bloodshed in Alexandria's palace. In the 1st century BC, Cleopatra II's revolt against Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II fractured the realm, leading to civil war in Cyrenaica and Upper Egypt. Berenice III and Ptolemy IX Soter II vied for control, leaving Alexandria vulnerable to popular unrest. Revolts in Thebes during Caesar's African campaign underscored the depths of social discontent. Economic strains, debts to Roman bankers, coinage debasements, and grain scarcity fueled popular uprisings in the Delta. Temple records reveal petitions from priests to Ptolemy XIV and Ptolemy XV to protect temple lands from confiscation. By the time Cleopatra VII inherited the throne in 51 BC, the Ptolemaic regime's internal divisions had hollowed out centralized authority, setting the stage for her fateful alliance with Rome. Cleopatra VII Philopator, daughter of Ptolemy XII, ascended as co-regent at age 18. Fluent in multiple languages and versed in Egyptian religious rites, she quickly asserted her authority, forging a liaison with Julius Caesar that quashed her brother Ptolemy XIII's revolt and restored her sole rule. Under Caesar's patronage, Cleopatra gave birth to Caesarion in 47 BC, cementing her status. She modernized administration, minting gold coinage with their joint portrait, and expanded grain exports to Rome. Yet, factional intrigue persisted in Alexandria, culminating in the Alexandrian War from 48 to 47 BC, during which parts of the Great Library Precinct were inadvertently burned. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra aligned with Mark Antony. Their meeting at Tarsus in 41 BC ignited a famous romance. As Antony's queen, she provided naval and financial support during his campaigns against Parthia and Octavian. The donations of Alexandria, wherein Antony granted eastern territories to Cleopatra's children, enraged Rome's Senate and precipitated the final war of the Roman Republic. The climactic naval battle of Actium in 31 BC saw Cleopatra's fleet retreat, under Antony's orders, to Alexandria. Their joint defeat and subsequent deaths in 30 BC ended 2,500 years of pharaonic dynasties. In the aftermath of Actium, Octavian invaded Egypt. Encouraged by courtiers, Cleopatra enticed Octavian with lavish banquets and displays of wealth in the Temple of Dendera, yet negotiations failed. Antony's subsequent defeat and death in Alexandria's cellar tomb left Cleopatra politically isolated. Facing humiliation in Rome, Cleopatra negotiated her terms, but as Octavian entered Alexandria in 30 BC, she chose death, allegedly by ass bite, rather than public display in his triumph. Her son Caesarion was executed. Ptolemaic rule ended. Octavian annexed Egypt as his personal province, governed by a prefect rather than the Senate. The Ptolemaic administrative machinery, temple lands, grain quotas, and tax registers, was absorbed into the Roman system, preserving much of its bureaucratic structure but under direct imperial control. Thus concluded the Ptolemaic saga, a Hellenistic dynasty that blended Egyptian tradition, Greek culture, and Roman politics, finally succumbing to the very power it once courted. The Ptolemaic era's intellectual achievements endured well into Roman and Byzantine times. The Library of Alexandria's legacy inspired future centers of learning, while scholars such as Euclid and Eratosthenes laid foundations for geometry and geography. The Serapeum at Saqqara preserved religious syncretism, melding Isis, Osiris, and Hellenistic philosophies. Artistically, the Ptolemaic fusion produced blended iconography, pharaonic statues in Greek drapery, mosaic floors depicting Nilotic landscapes, and frescoes combining Egyptian color palettes with Hellenistic realism. Greco-Egyptian temples, like those at Edfu and Dendera, exemplify this synthesis. Traditional pylon gateways lead to interiors adorned with Greek coffered ceilings and Corinthian columns. Administratively, the Ptolemaic model of centralized grain collection and export influenced Roman Egypt's Annona system. The use of bilingual decrees, Greek and Demotic, set precedents for subsequent multilingual governance in the Roman East. Perhaps Cleopatra VII remains the dynasty's most enduring symbol, a paradigmatic ruler whose political acumen and cultural patronage epitomized the Ptolemaic blend of pharaonic tradition and Hellenistic innovation. When Octavian Augustus took Egypt, he retained much of the Ptolemaic administrative apparatus. The system of nome governors evolved into the Roman prefecture, but continued to rely on local village headmen and temple hierarchies for census, tax collection, and grain shipments to Rome. The granary network centered in Alexandria became Rome's primary breadbasket. The office of the dioichetes under the Ptolemies was transformed into the Roman Praefectus Aegypti, responsible for Annona, public works, and legal administration, a direct institutional inheritance. Culturally, Alexandrian scientific traditions informed Roman astronomy and medicine. The city's schools remained active under Roman patronage. Egyptian cults, Isis, Serapis, and Osiris, spread throughout the Mediterranean as mystery religions carried by merchant and soldier alike. Architecturally, the Ptolemaic city grid, harbors, and lighthouse continued in use. Roman emperors added triumphal arches, but left the core urban fabric intact. The continued use of bilingual decrees and coins bearing both Greek and Latin legends point to the Ptolemaic legacy in shaping Roman provincial governance. Thus, Ptolemaic Egypt served as a bridge between pharaonic antiquity and Roman imperial systems. Its fusion of centralized bureaucracy, grain commissariat, and cultural patronage persisted long after the last pharaoh's fall, enduring in the structures and ideas of Roman, Byzantine, and eventually Islamic Egypt. And so concludes our journey through Ptolemaic Egypt, from Alexander's successors to Cleopatra's final stand and the dynasty's enduring legacies. We've seen how a Macedonian general forged a pharaonic line, blending Egyptian religion with Greek learning, and how those institutions outlived the last Ptolemy to become foundations of Roman rule. If you've enjoyed this voyage across one of history's most fascinating cross-cultural crucibles, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Until our next odyssey into antiquity's hidden chapters, stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring the legacies that shaped our world.